morning and read just a couple of verses of scripture. We'll not read all that we did yesterday, but beginning in verse number 1, 2 Timothy, Paul's writing to young Timothy, the preacher. He says, "Thou therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men, who shall be able to teach others also. Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ." We started yesterday talking about the qualities of a good soldier, and we have looked at 2 or 3 different aspects of that. And this morning I'd like to wrap that up so that we can continue next week, maybe here and there in the scriptures, looking at various passages just to get some thoughts and insight concerning various texts in the Bible. We found yesterday, as we looked at a good soldier, it's a follower. Is willing to have a relationship with the Lord, willing to have a relationship with the commander. It implies rank, that they submit to someone that is leading the way, and a good soldier is a follower, leading the one that is in high rank, that is paving the way and leading the way and commanding the battlefield. Also implies rule. There is certain rules and standards that the soldier has to live by. I'll not say a lot about it this morning. I don't want to get sidetracked with a thought, but I'm shocked and I'm appalled at the lack of discipline with some of the military branches that we have today. I remember even years ago, we were helping to establish our military ministry and outreach going into the one particular Army base. And as we entered into the base, there was a large group of men that were out, and young ladies partying. When I say a large group, upwards of 50 or more, maybe even been upwards of 75 or 100. They were scattered everywhere at a little store, convenient type store just inside the gate. And they were partying, they were smoking dope, but they had all kinds of things taking place right in the open on a military base. And I was blown away by the fact that they were allowed to do that publicly and get away with it. I remember going into the institution, and there was one particular young man that worked in the RCF, the Regional Correctional Facility, and he had gotten in trouble by one of the commanders because he was running late. And one thing you don't want to do is be late in the military for your meetings. And so he parked his car, jumped a fence, ran across the parade ground, jumped another fence, and went over into the RCF. And there was a general that saw him and reported him, got the commander, his immediate commander in, and I mean, they chewed him up one side and down the other. But the fact that a young man would be willing to do that and violate military rules and military law, let me put it this way. I'd hate to be in a battlefield in a trench, and I know we don't necessarily fight in trenches anymore, but I'd sure hate to be in a trench fighting with some of the things that and the people and things too that I've seen in the military. There's a rule of thumb. There's a general rule that we must follow, and of course it's biblical commands and doctrines in the Bible if we're going to be a good soldier. It implies that a person is faithful. It implies that they're patient, are willing to wait at the right time, wait for the command of the commander. Then we find that also he has priorities. He has certain tasks that are before him. The military has special forces. I remember I have an uncle, Dwight, that was instrumental in leading me to the Lord, and he was ex-paratrooper in the Vietnam War, a Marine, and he told me several situations where they dropped him behind enemy lines, and the patience that it required to wait for the enemy to come in to gain the intelligence that was needed. And so a good soldier is one that is a faithful man, and he's a follower. He has priorities, and then of course his practices are disciplined. Then he's familiar with the sound of the commander's voice. We saw that he is skilled in using his weapons, and that's part of what boot camp and basic training is. It's not all about physical conditioning, especially in wartime. It's about using the weaponry of warfare, and the Bible, of course, gives us our weaponry of warfare in the book of Ephesians, chapter number 5, and we're to be very skilled in it. He knows the strategy of his enemy. He knows how the devil works. Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary is a roaring lion walking about seeking whom he may devour, according to 1 Peter's writing. And so we find also, fourthly, this morning, that he is a fighter. And of course, we would expect a soldier to be a fighter, but the mark of a good soldier is that he is a fighter. Now, I want to say this morning. I believe that in warfare, there's times that it is justified that we go to battle, we go to war, and I do not believe that it's considered murder when we have to take the life of an enemy that is trying to commit tyranny, treason, or whatever the case may be. and to try to rule and dictate and literally slaughter millions sometimes of people. I remember Idi Amin, as we went into Uganda, they hadn't been out of rule too long, and they went in and literally, there were tribes, Brother Steve, and I think you and I were together on that particular trip. There were entire villages that they went in and literally annihilated. They would literally, and we're all adults here, and I'm assuming all be adults watching on YouTube or the Facebook account, but they actually went in and decapitated entire villages and stuck their heads on top of sticks lying down the roads and the highways as people traveled, just to strike fear in the hearts of the people. And there are times when we have to go to war physically, and I understand that. But I also want to say that we're in a spiritual battle. We're in a spiritual warfare. And it's very important that we learn that we have some determination. The Bible talks about us being steadfast and contending for the faith. We mentioned that verse yesterday as we read our text and read through the scriptures. And so we find that a good soldier, he's willing to fight. I believe one of the reasons why the world is the way it is toward the church is the church has lost its respect of the world because we've no longer stood for the truths of the doctrines. We have not contended for the faith. Again, I'm not speaking of taking up arms against our society or the enemies of the church, only in warfare with nations and those that would be against our nation and have a desire to do harm. But I'm just simply saying that we ought to be willing to not so much take up arms, but take up spiritual arms and be able to go out and fight. A fighter is determined. He's a soldier that does not retreat in the face of an enemy. And so a good soldier is a fighter. He doesn't back down. He doesn't bend. He doesn't budge. He bows. And if willing, he's willing to give his life and lay it on the line. One of the things that I was able to watch yesterday, I've not been able to keep up with the news near as much as I normally do. And I try to keep up with them, the world events, especially because of having a ministry that is worldwide outreach. But one of the things I was impressed with the D-Day celebration was the fact that soldier after soldier that they interviewed in Normandy and the D-Day celebration, they gave testimonies of storming the face of enemies and storming the German troops that were embedded and all of the sacrifice. And when the odds were against them, that they kept pressing forward. And they mentioned of one particular group that, if I remember correctly, there was 75,000 of them. It was all said and done. The majority of them had been slaughtered by the gunfire and the machine guns of the German soldiers. And so a good soldier is willing to fight. He's willing to stand in the face of an enemy, stand in the face of the opposition. He doesn't bend, he doesn't budge, he doesn't bow. He is willing to give his life, if need be, for the freedom and the cause in which he fights. He's driven, he's motivated. I would not want to go into warfare with someone who is not motivated. And unfortunately, there are many preachers today that are just biding their time. I'm not... you have to be careful using that word Biden today, don't you? But they're biding their time. They are just trying to get by, trying to ride it out, trying to just wait until the end, until their days are done. And I'm not implying that God's done with all men, all preachers, all evangelists, all missionaries, God forbid. The Lord knows. I believe that we ought to be willing to go and move forward till the Lord calls us home. I remember during the Ministries practical training we had back in February, and I forgot who it was that made the statement, but said that Dr. Seitler with the great church there at Tabernacle Baptist Church in Greenville, South Carolina, he was getting up in years and was having some health issues, and I'm not sure if at that particular time, but I know that there was some dementia and so forth, Alzheimer's that were setting in, and someone had asked him about his resigning or possibly training someone else to step in. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, but I remember they said, Dr. Seitler said, well, I'll think about it and I'll pray about it. And they came back after a few days and he said, I prayed about it. He said, I believe I've just determined I'm going to die with my boots on. But that statement he made, he was going to stay on the front lines. He was going to stay in the ministry, stay in the battle until the Lord called him home, until he passed from this walk of life to the other. A person that's called into the ministry or a good soldier, they're driven, they're motivated. They don't have to be pushed out of bed in the morning. They don't have to be pushed and prodded all the time in their ministry. They have a determination. And then we find they're dedicated. A good fighter is dedicated. He is fully committed. He's willing to pay the price, willing to discipline himself. And then last but not least, according to our text in verse number 7, verse number 8, he's a finisher. They finish the job. One of the tragedies of America in some of our most recent wars is the fact that we haven't finished the job. We have left early. We have given in, caved in, and turned it over to the enemy. And I'll not get into that this morning, but I want to say again that I believe a good soldier is a finisher. He finishes the job. And God help and God forbid our president and our leaders and our government and our Congress when they make decisions to tie the hands of our soldiers. Why in the world would you put a soldier on a battlefield facing the enemy, and in some cases in our nation's history, not even give them bullets in their guns? That's about as stupid as you can get. Pardon me? That's stupidity to the nth degree, as the old saying goes. Why would you do that? Why would you not allow them to fulfill the responsibility that they've been given to? He's a finisher. He's resolved. And the Abigail there, pulling out all the war and so forth, and the 13 soldiers, which many of them were Marines, the majority of them. But what a foolish decision. You say, you're not supposed to get political. Well, I'm an individual. I've got a right to be opinionated. Yes. And I've got a right to be right. I don't want to be wrong, but I want to say this. We ought to have some resolve. We ought to see it through to the end. And so a good soldier is a finisher. And I want to say another thing, and that is two more things on a good soldier being a fighter, and that is that he has a reason. He understands why he has to endure hardship. It's not just he does it strictly because of the command of the commander, the leader, the general, but he does it because of that. He knows the discipline as a result of it if he don't in the court martial, but it goes beyond that. He's got a reason. He has a purpose, and that's why he's motivated and determined. He understands why he's fighting. He understands that the soldier on the battlefield, he understands if he's an American soldier that if he gives his life, he's giving it for a cause. He's got a purpose. He has a reason for his fight and his battle. And if you don't have a reason, they'll turn tail and run when the heat gets on and when the battle gets fierce. I remember talking to my uncle. He didn't say a lot about Vietnam, and most of the old soldiers don't say a lot about the war and so forth because of the horrific memories and so forth that it brings back, and for I'm sure other reasons. But I heard him tell the stories. He didn't talk about it extensively, but I've heard him tell enough stories, bits and pieces here and there to pick up on certain things. And he told them certain battle scenes where soldiers were to be looking for the Viet Cong, the enemy, and they were to be standing or setting guard, and they would change shifts and so forth on guard. And some of them got hold of drugs, heroin, cocaine, whatever it was. And they were on guard and sitting there, and he said, we've seen more than a few that got their heads blown off by the enemy because they were stoned out of their minds, and they were setting up right in front of the enemy. They weren't alert, weren't on guard or whatever. Those soldiers lost their purpose. They lost their intent, their reason. They disobeyed the orders to watch for the enemy. And in doing so, they jeopardized entire brigades and battalions and soldiers and special forces because of their slothfulness and because of their lack of discipline and not fulfilling the reason. Last but not least, a good soldier is also, as I said, a finisher, but a good soldier, he understands he has his reward. What is his reward? His freedom for those at which he stands and fights for. I want to say this as one. I thank God for every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, anyone who served in any of the armed forces for our nation. I thank God for them. And for those that have given their life, I thank God for their sacrifice.
Yes, sir.
I do. I thank God for it. But I want to say this morning that I thank God for not just the soldiers that fought the physical battles on the battlefields of wars throughout the centuries and existence of humanity. There's been wars ever since before mankind. The Bible speaks of wars in heaven. Satan was cast out of heaven. And so there's always been wars. There'll always be wars until the end of times. There'll be wars and rumors of wars in the end time more than ever before, and we're certainly living in that day. We're on the brink of a third world war. It can happen in a blink of an eye. But I want to say to you, I thank God for those that died on the battlefield and fought on the physical battlefields of the world, but I thank God who fought the spiritual battles. I thank God for the old preachers of yesteryear. Not just the old preachers of yesteryear, the old preachers of yesteryear that stood the test of time. They stood in the gap. They stood on the battlefield. They didn't flinch. They didn't budge. They didn't move. A good soldier finishes his course because he knows at the end of the war, he'll have his reward. And I think about Dr. Garris and one of my heroes of the faith. And when he passed away that morning on September the 12th of 2006. I remember the time there at the house, and I left. We just lived about less than a quarter mile from the house, probably a fifth of a mile from where he lived there on the corner, and ran to the house to freshen up and to come back. And I had no more got to our house. And Peggy called and said Brother Ron had passed away and gone on to be of the Lord. Well, you know, at that time, he received his reward. He was in the presence of the Lord. To be absent from this body is to be present with the Lord. And a good soldier one day will receive his reward. And I thank God for it. May we all be good soldiers and be finishers and not be a casualty in the ministry, not be a casualty in Christianity. It helps to be a good soldier and fight a good fight. Brother Steve, give us a course.